Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Friday Focus, the 29th of November 2024. Rapidly moving towards the end of the year. Where is the year gone? Thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for listening if you're listening after the live show. As we know, many of you do. We appreciate your involvement, and we're just moving into a slight flurry of programs this week, next week, and the week after. As we move up to Christmas, we're presenting every week as opposed to our normal fortnightly show. Just thinking ahead, so this week we're talking to Daniel Sobel. I'll introduce you in a moment. Next week we have Felicia Gibson from PAGS, a company that specializes in software, particularly focusing on special education needs. And then we move into the Great Christmas Read. As educators, we read and we like to look at what's going on and what's readable and what's making a difference at the moment. So please like, share, and if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Just press the subscribe button. We want to grow the network. We know that there are a number of people listening and watching the show and getting involved in the conversation. And really thank you for those that got engaged last week with our conversation, or last show with Jane Bellis, and we've had some really interesting conversations since then. As we're on LinkedIn, you can leave comments. We will see them live, and as we go through the conversation, if there are things that you'd like us to sort of address as we talk, please put your comment in LinkedIn. Unfortunately, you can't do that in YouTube just yet, but if you leave a message in either of them, we'll get back to you later. But thank you for being here, and let me just introduce my guest, Daniel Sobel. Welcome this morning to Friday Focus, Daniel.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And look, I ask all of our guests at the beginning. Tell us a bit about yourself and your journey to where you are. What's your interest and what's got you to where you
are? I had a difficult schooling, which informed the rest of my career, really. So, I had undiagnosed ADHD. I spent most of my childhood being told I was naughty and lazy and rubbish. And my inattentive ADHD was harder to spot, so it wasn't hyperactive. I was sloth-like and seemingly distracted. And I actually spent quite a bit of my childhood at the bottom of the class and sort of being told that I, essentially communicated with that I wasn't any good at school. And so I didn't get any A-levels or a first degree. And I just add something which I don't normally mention. My best friend in primary school was a boy with multiple sort of physical disabilities and some speech issues as well. And he walked with a walking frame, and I was his best friend at school. And when I went to secondary school and he went off to, I think, some sort of specialist school or something like that, my parents, my mum encouraged me not to stay in touch with him because, I was going to get some quote unquote proper friends. And actually, I feel guilty about that. I felt guilty about that most of my life. I did eventually track him down and apologize, and I was only sort of like 11 or 12. However it was. But I think that sort of memory has haunted me a little bit, because I was his only friend and I abandoned him.
Yeah.
I didn't get any A-levels and I didn't do a first degree, but I jumped straight into a master's in education psychology in my mid-20s at the Institute of Education, and eventually did a master's in psychotherapy and a postmaster's, like a doctoral training in psychotherapy, and eventually a PhD. Ran out of money, started teaching, fairly quickly became a Senko, and I won some awards for that, and I started writing a series for The Guardian and consulting a bit with the DFE, and helping out in local authority, the local authority I was based in, and then thought, I like doing this, I'll do it full time. And so that led to us working with, over the course of quite a few years, about 10,000 schools or so in different capacities. Then I wrote some books, a few of which became bestsellers, and I had certain connections on LinkedIn, so I reached out during lockdown to find out what some of the best practices are around the world in inclusion, and we started sharing ideas, and people were interested to chip in and jump on and one thing another, and that ended up in the organization of the International Forum of Inclusion Practitioners, and that's now in 135 countries. And we've done partnership work with the European Union, with UNESCO, with the G20, and with lots of governments around the world. So that's about the size of it. I spend most of my time traveling to different countries and supporting and consulting in inclusion stuff with governments and so on and so forth. So I've just come back from a spate of ridiculous travels, which sounds much better than it is in reality.
Yes,
that's it.
Dan, I know how busy you are, because it's been very difficult to get to, and your assistant is very very diligent in communicating. So, but I appreciate you being here, and I thank you for just taking a moment. And I know you've just come back from travel, so it's appreciated. I'm fascinated. It's not the right word, but I'm really interested in that what you've just described, and I thank you that you've been open in sharing your background. And I'm going to sort of count it with an example of mine. And I've spoken this in training sessions previously. I went to a school in South England. The difference between my primary and secondary was that I grew up in Kent, and we did the Kent test. And I actually, very similarly to you, I had a best friend at primary school. We lived sort of doors from each other, and we'd walk to school together and walk home together. We were in the same class. We did the same Kent test. I passed the Kent test, which is the kind of equivalent of 11 plus, and he didn't. And we went to one of the only bilateral schools in the country. So it was a secondary modern and a grammar school in the same building.
Yeah.
But I, to this day, and I've tried to track him down, and I've failed in that. And so if ever Philip is listening, I am deeply affected by that, the experience that at that point of change, we lost contact. We actually walked together to school. We worked in, well, actually not in secondary school, but in that experience. And to me, the exclusion of that system, although they believed that it was going to be inclusive because it was in the same building, I never saw him for my life in secondary school. I never met him again. In that, we were completely separated, and that was that I guess in a way that's one of your experience of inclusion is embedded in that experience at school. And I'm fascinated talking to lots of people about how that groundwork has laid that foundation and the passion to then go and do something. And I certainly that drives a bit of my activities. It's really interesting to hear you sort of candidly start with that. It does lay a foundation, doesn't it? It's fundamental to our development about those experiences, intended or the consequence of unintended action.
Yeah, I mean, it's not entirely surprising. There are many manifestations of this concept into lots of different employments. You find people. I was just in Kazakhstan last week, and they gave me a minder. I say minder. I mean, somebody just to take care of me because I don't speak the language, either Kazakh or Russian. Also, just getting around is slightly hard, and it's minus 13 degrees, so it's like cold. And they basically didn't want me to anyway. So they paired me with this poor girl who's 17 years old. She was volunteering just to help with this organization because I went to speak at this thing. Anyway, so she basically gets me because she's a volunteer. And anywho, I asked her what what do you want to do, career wise? What's next for you? And she said, I'm going to be a dentist. And I was like intrigued, just sort of said, what makes you want to be a dentist so much in this sort of firm sort of way? And she said, well, I had a brace for 4 or 5 years, and it really affected my friendships and my whole life. And I want to help other children who are in that situation.
Mm.
I mean, it's not entirely surprising. I always do wonder why people become dentists, by the way. But and also, there is a bit of a brain drain from Kazakhstan, especially if you've got the means. She could have gone and worked elsewhere in the world, but she specifically wants to stay in Kazakhstan and be a dentist because she wants to help dentistry in Kazakhstan. I mean, I think that there's something, I think I remember reading a poem by Wordsworth, The Wounded Soldier, is the idea of the wounded warrior, is the sort of, the warrior with passion, has been wounded and experienced through life and brings that into what they do. And I think that's a little bit like that. It only just gives a layer of purpose, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Oh no, I was just going to capture that and say that in a sense, that's where the educational experience needs to in a way prick that moral purpose and find that moral purpose, and how that education experience is able to instigate something. And quite often, it's the experiences of life that capture that or instigate it or start it. And yeah, it's fascinating to see. And I wish the education system was able to do that. In fact, society as a whole was able to do that broadly. Let's move to so IFIP. You've got that on your title. You're chair of this organization. Just tell us a bit about what that is. You've just said you're traveling into, you've got projects in 135 countries. What is IFIP? And tell us a bit about the aims. I mean, I certainly, from my experience of education, after 40 years of being in learning, I'm intrigued by it. I wasn't aware of it until some interactions with you a few years ago. So tell us a little bit about it.
I mean, it's a relatively new organisation, and we seem to have jumped the queue into having a front row seat at sort of big global events and meeting with governments all over the world and everything. And that's only really because inclusion in some ways has become the in thing around the world. Most governments have, for quite a few years now, made inclusion a top priority item. If you remember, 20 years ago, it was sort of around, but like SEN was always a sort of like a quirky additional point that was happening in a corridor down the, some sort of corridor that most kids don't go down, and where there was a Senko there who was usually, like me, quite eccentric, and it was all happening over there and wasn't. But now, it's the top agenda item here in England. It's all over the world. But like here in England, most countries really struggle to know how to implement it. So there is actually a gap between policy aspiration and what's happening in reality. And that's why the idea of having a sort of a body of experts who are practitioner experts. I don't mean like professors doing research or policy experts. I'm just talking about real practitioners who are making it happen in their countries. For them to advise government on how to make it work is actually quite useful. And that's why things have got very busy very quickly. So the IFIP is a free membership organization. There's plenty of free stuff to do. We do 3 things generally. Number 1 is that we try to gather practitioner voices and share them with policy. And I was really excited yesterday. I mean, in the most nerdiest possible way, I read the G20 Fortaleza statement, which just came out because I presented to the G20 in Brazil. And this was on the basis of think tanks, which the IFIP think tanks, which we had, basically gathering practitioner voices from across Central and South America, and we came together at the Parliament building in Sao Paulo and wrote some advice and support and a paper, basically, which we gave to the G20. This was what was interesting, is reading the G20 paper that they produced wasn't quite a copy and paste job of what we wrote, but it was very close. And that was really cool to see that we've clearly had some sort of influence. Unless, of course, if you were marking the homework, you'd say this was plagiarized.
Yes.
And, you could argue, well, it's just a fluke. But I don't think it was. So I'd say that was super cool. It was all written by teachers and parents and, experts in the field, real practitioners. And they've managed to write a document which is being read by ministries of education around the world. And it's so cool. I think that's one thing that we do. And another thing that we do is, and not anyone can get involved in that in sort of different levels. The other thing that we do is we try and upskill teachers. So we've got some in-house programs where we, like the Global Inclusive Teaching Initiative, which is an online training program which I wrote with Professor Carol Tomlinson from the United States, Helena Warburg from Sweden, and so on. And they are it's actually being used in 70 different countries. And then the third thing is we bring people together in different ways as a form of forum. Now, events, online, in person, different forums, different groups doing different things. And we've got a lot of that, and it kind of it's become a new normal for us. It's having a Zoom chat, and there's this person from Iraq, and this person from Bhutan, and this person from Bolivia, and so that's cool. That's nice. It's like connecting the world. It feels like normal for us. So
yeah. Look, if no one else is going to say it, that your first point, pat on the back. Congratulations. That being the voice to power is yes, it's cool, but it's the result of that bringing together those people and actually having something to say. I will declare here, you invited me last year to get involved in the awards, and you awarded us as Smart Curriculum International or IFIP status. So we were awarded as inclusion practitioners this year, and thank you, Daniel. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get you here, just to talk about that process. Not banging on for us, but that it's part of a global activity. And just one, thank you for that honor, but two, it's really important, and that's why you're here to talk about it, because we need to get other people involved in this. And I think that the practitioner element of what you've just described is so important. It's not just the great and the good thinking about stuff, because so much of what I see and hear in school and with parents is we need to meet the needs of the children, and they're not getting met, and they're excluded from this, that, and the other. I the more I read, sort of statements of intent from government level, inclusion is getting higher and higher on the list. Just read the one from the UAE, and it's, I think, of the 10 points, I think 5 of them refer to inclusion. So it's clearly becoming a very strong element wherever we are in that. How do you think the awards are impacting this agenda? Do you think? I mean, obviously, I know you're looking for sort of routes to raise that raise the issue. If someone was interested in that, how would they get involved in the awards for next year? Is that on the plan?
Yeah, I think they're about to be launched today, or it could be Monday. It's ironic that you're sort of mentioning it. We've got 3 categories which are just being launched now. One is, and that basically we're giving them. The Bet Show in London are very kindly given us our own hall and our own stage. So we are, one of the things we're doing is we're hosting the Global Inclusion Awards. So what are we doing? We've got 3 categories. One is social, emotional, mental health stuff. The other is for heads of year, heads of key stage, and counsellors and child well-being, different types of things, or anything to do with the care of children. and possibly the care of adults as well. We actually don't discriminate against all. And we should just sort of say these aren't exclusive awards. What I mean is we don't have a hierarchy of like, we had 100 applicants and we chose 10 finalists and then here's the number one. We don't do that. We have a sort of category when we look at carefully and rigorously look at how well this is contributing to building inclusion and what the evidence suggests, and if there's hard and soft data and all these sorts of things. And if we think it does, then we do an award. That was the first category anyway. The second is, I think, corporate inclusion, like business level. And then the third was technology. There's actually a big piece around technology, which we're going to be getting into more and more, which is that we have technology and education experts and we have inclusion experts. What we tend not to have is those two in meaningful conversation with each other. And so we've developed some frameworks in the forthcoming year or two to try and do that. So the award is partly a way of saying, let's attract what is happening out there to see, so that we can, that we can have case studies. So all of the award winners, including yours, including Smart Curriculum, will end up in booklets of advice to governments, and we are hoping to launch a white paper in the forthcoming year. So that will go to all governments around the world, and it will include best examples and practices of inclusion. That includes the award winners and so on and so forth. And what we found is that inadvertently, wasn't actually the intention, but this is an example of an outcome of the Global Inclusion Awards. And so that in itself is a little bit of a network of really expert practitioners, of organizations and people from all around the world. That's pretty cool. So yeah, we're just continuing to do it. We're trying to do it in a really exclusive, exclusive being the opposite of inclusive, kind of a way, and in a non-hierarchical way, in a sort of very kind and encouraging way. So anyone who didn't meet the mark, we actually wrote them a little bit of an essay about how well we think they're doing, and also how we think that they could improve and nudge a bit to increase the likelihood of them getting it next time. So we want people to win.
That to me is the marker of what you're doing, and that certainly was it's a pleasant experience. You go to award ceremonies and you go through that, shortlisted, and then whether you win or not, it's there's always a feeling around not winning. But the one thing I would say about the Inclusion Award is it is just a kind of fellowship of great people that are doing some amazing things around the world, of which there are. I mean, reading some of the profiles and reading some of the details of what's out there, they're stunning. I'm just going to share a screen just for those that are not familiar. This is if it's going to do it. There we are. So this is the IFOP.group. This is the website, and the winners of the awards last year. Just takes a moment to load. There's all of the those included here. So as you can see, there are many awards. I think we're right somewhere near the bottom. Not that matters. They're grouped by country, and they genuinely are all over the world. So just commend to you if you're watching and you just want to go and have a look and get involved in some of the elements there. And as Daniel has just described, you can join. So you can join IFIP to be part of the forum by just going through the link. So if you're interested, please do so. So Daniel, we use this word inclusion, and it's describing something that means something. Just give us some, it's a basic. So what is inclusion in the educational environment? For those, what can we expect of it? What are some examples of what's happening among those people that we've just championed?
Yes, there's about 4 different questions there, all very clever ones.
Sorry.
It is a question which I get asked a lot, and ironically, I don't really feel like I'm capable of answering particularly well or efficiently. It's not something I think about a huge amount. I only think about it when people ask me. And there's some good reasons for that. It's not partly I'm avoidant. That's one thing. It's also, it can be quite a political thing. People in different countries, it means different things. And I did some work with the Slovakian government once, and they, for the inclusion, what they really meant was, how do we include the Gypsy Roma community, which is a significant minority in the country, and that and then they've got implications there. Well, what inclusion means in America may have to do with sort of race and justice and things. What inclusion means in other countries, like every country you could go through has its own sort of peculiarities. I was speaking with the Ministry of Education in Ethiopia that had done sort of inclusion projects funded by, I don't know who it was, the Africa Development Bank, and they'd made 800 inclusion offices or something like that around the country. And this is what they meant by it was physical disabilities. It's just, I thought to myself, we had an opportunity to do something, not just physical disabilities, but neurodiversity and lots of other things. But it wasn't really on their agenda. And similarly, I was recently sat next to a major fund in Japan, some dinner, and I was sort of saying, tell me about the projects which you've been sponsoring. And the project which they sponsored, they've developed a sort of technology to make sure that the hearing impairment is supported in every classroom in Japan, which is amazing. But what sort of like, it's that focus there. And that's not a criticism at all. It's just that you just notice that different countries are focusing on different things. What do they have in common is that they're trying to make lives of both children and parents and teachers better. And so that's one definition of inclusion is, give everybody some help up, right? The other is to do with equality of access. It's very difficult to think about equality of access where very large swathes of the world don't have access to computers. They might have access to internet and phones, actually, ironically. The work that we're doing in Africa, there's a lot of phones, there's a lot of internet, but they don't have laptops or they don't have access to the web necessarily. And, you've got 100 children in a classroom with one teacher who isn't particularly trained or qualified, and actually probably none of us listening to this call are particularly qualified to teach 100 children in one go, but you don't have access to the internet. Well, you don't have access, that's tough. So there are huge disparities. UNICEF is looking at that particular issue about access to, actually the world is dividing. And one of the rifts that it's dividing, one of the dividing lines is who has access to technology and who doesn't. Anywho, we've got lots of different sort of definitions of inclusion. For me, it has to do with more like how you feel. And so you could have a scenario whereby you've got lots of different activities going on, sort of lots of specifics and actions, but the net result is all very exclusive and people feeling maligned. Remember, there's so many examples of this, but it's where good intentions lead to sort of like corrupt outcomes. And the phrase I like to use is the Cobra effect, even though the Cobra effect is the idea of a particular Indian town under the sort of British rule was encouraged to get rid of the cobras, and what we'll do is we'll pay you 10 rupees for every cobra, dead cobra that you bring. And then sort of people clocked onto this and thought, oh, well, here's a money spinner. And so they started breeding cobras. And the net result was, you had a significant proliferation of cobras. And you see lots of examples like that within inclusion, where the intention is very positive, but the outcomes are not really, almost like the opposite. But I'll give you a very specific example, just because that sounds theoretical and esoteric. There was a school that said, well, we've got a really special provision for our children from poorer backgrounds in our school. And so just to help our lunch staff, we give them, some, free meals and extra sort of stuff as well. So they wear a sort of like a purple badge, and they queue up in that queue over there. I mean, just like they're literally walking around with the purple badge saying, "Hi everyone, I'm from a poor family."
Yeah.
There's that, and I'm in the special queue, and it's kind of like, you get what they're trying to do, and I applaud the intention. It's the outcome that counts, and I think that about most things to do with inclusion, it really is the outcomes that count. It's less about what to do and more about what the outcomes are, and the outcomes actually are more determined by a level of emotional intelligence. See, actually, if you look at the particular example there, which is, I would describe it as a fairly classic example. There's another. Well, I'll give you another very obvious classic example. There was a primary school that was very proud of the sheer quantity of time, money, and effort that they put into the sort of specialist services within their school. And they sort of said any children who are identified with particular needs, they go to that particular classroom over there around year 1, year 2. And I said, "Oh, that's great. And when do they integrate back into the mainstream school?" "Oh, no, they get educated there." "Oh, do they mix at break times?" "Oh, no, they've got their own break times." So what they'd essentially set up was a sort of exclusionary small group, which is sort of kept away from the rest of the school, with the intention, with the very good, honest intention of providing for these children. So I think the difference between the intention and the outcome is determined more by emotional intelligence and understanding through empathy about the outcomes and thinking about the outcomes from an empathic perspective. That I think is a determining factor. So in some ways, you could say that's inclusion. Inclusion is a direction of travel, fueled by empathy.
Absolutely. I'm just going to. A good friend of mine has just commented. So, Paul, nice to see you here. Intention can be great, but we must always circle back to the outcomes and impacts. Paul, I know as a school leader, is sort of, saying the same thing. And thanks for that comment, Paul. Really appreciate it. I think it's that level of an emotional intelligence that you've just touched on, Daniel, that's so key in that. It's the values that we hold. But I actually just thinking, one of the things that Smart Curriculum does is kind of examine the organizational structure of schools and how the kind of the law of unintended consequences it hits. We have this drive for. In England, particularly for high performance, and how many of the children, because of the structures that we put in place, are excluded. It's with the intention of getting the great results. Sometimes I wonder about whether it's for the school or for the children. That's a question to sort of set aside for another time. But those that are excluded in that process, and I think your example of the purple badge is such a powerful one in terms of how children are considered, and the children's perspective. That empathic approach is so key in leadership, of seeing how the children are going to perceive it as much as our intent in delivering whatever it is in terms of a program. Because it can be, I'm thinking back to the examples we talked about right at the beginning of the show, those things that they may have had great intent, but they actually had consequences that were quite challenging. That's Daniel. That's really, that's so important. I'm going to bring in somebody else's comment here. That Jonathan, I see inclusion as a deep sensitivity and inherent differences between each of us, and that each teacher should plan and every curriculum accommodate these differences of mind. The Gardner concept of existence of multiple intelligences are either discredited or not. It's useful. Jonathan, thank you. That's an interesting comment.
What he to sort of leap off what he said there, which is an interesting comment. I think there's a big difference, sort of, post 2000 and pre-2000 in teaching is that we shifted from teaching to learning, and learning is something that we all do differently. And it really, in my, a lot of what inclusion is, apart from certain, I would say, facilities and specific activities, actually it's just good inclusive, good teaching. And our globally inclusive teaching initiative is actually predominantly it's just good pedagogy, which is centered around the fact that we all learn differently. And I think that the discredit of Gardner's approach is fair, but what he did was he opened the door to us thinking that we approach the world differently as individuals. And that, I think, has been the positive outcome effect of that, and I think that maintains. And I think the capacity to see that is not necessarily determined by professional development or training, but in some ways an innate ability to see people, and that in some ways will determine whether a teacher will see a child who is causing distress, whereas another teacher will see the same child as being in distress. I don't think the gap is necessarily a sort of level of cognitive understanding of what's happening with that child, but rather an emotional intelligence or an emotional will. And we can debate, and there is a debate, and I'm not really qualified to debate whether to what extent you can change teachers' minds and you can train teachers. And this is quite a controversial thought, but I'm more of the opinion that you can't. In the same ways, I do think there are different strokes for different folks, different professions that are aligned with people in different ways, and that's, we all have different strengths and things. I don't think it's possible to be a good teacher without a certain level of emotional intelligence, and generally that will determine people's attitudes towards inclusion. Generally, it isn't necessarily to do with money. Money, stress, and time is an issue all over the world. And if it was up to me, I just, actually, there's a sort of Chinese company that sort of sponsored me a bit to sort of, with our work with different countries and things. And what they've really focused on is trying to cut out all of the paperwork that teachers have to do, like any form of paperwork at all, using AI. And that's a really powerful solution, which, as far as I'm concerned, is potentially the biggest game changer in regards to inclusion, because that would free up teachers to do the thing which they love the most, which is teaching, right? And that is the solution to pretty much 95% of all inclusion issues. Is good human interaction. So although it's a sort of technical AI-led, it's not exactly inclusion focused, but it does allow the thing which I think is at the heart of inclusion, that makes it, the pumping heart, which is this sort of human interaction. And I think the human interaction is only really as good as the teachers have a level of emotional intelligence. That's what I'm saying, which is slightly.
Daniel, I think as a school leader, the way that I would translate that, I remember interviewing lots of teachers for jobs, and they would come and say, I'm a teacher of physics, I'm a teacher of geography, I'm a teacher of maths. I was a vice principal at the time, and my head teacher, or the principal of the organization, would say, no, you're not a teacher of physics, you're a teacher of children. You happen to be teaching physics. You are a teacher of children, and it's your quality and your ability to engage children that we're interested in, not your knowledge of the subject. That's almost got to come as given, because you're a subject expert. Actually, I'm just going to bring Jonathan's another comment from Jonathan back in, because I know Jonathan is working at Christchurch, Canterbury, and involved in ITT, and just this. We spend very little time on teacher education, on the idea of emotional intelligence, yet as you say, it's crucial to good, effective, caring teaching. Exactly as you're saying, Daniel. I mean, if we could take all of the organizational stuff out of inclusion, it's actually teachers being human beings and teaching human beings, and that emotional interaction with them that's so important. I think that's if there's a takeaway from this, it's about that mindset change. It's not about organization, it's about being human.
So I was in China a couple of weeks ago. I'm sorry,
No, please, you're here today. Yeah.
But the thing that was weird, somebody asked me a question which kind of made me sit back for a moment, and I wasn't expecting to hear it in China, of all places. Anyway, the deputy head of this particular school said, are we saying that that in education there is love? I don't hear the L word in education.
Don't hear very many in any organization. No. Wow.
And, but anyway, it kind of really made me think. And so we just had a bit of a group discussion about it at the time. I said, why don't we open it up? And effectively, we were saying that there are what we're describing is an aspect of love.
Yeah.
And that sounds almost uncomfortable and weird. But if you put it in the context of the way that you described it, and also that I think about it, as that it feels to me like we're going full circle eventually to a sort of more primitive understanding of education. I would say primitive. For me, it's more advanced. The idea of this sort of basic human interaction between an older human and a younger human. Yeah. And it's not just the factoidal exchange, but the human interaction exchange that is the focus point. There is something which can be described as love, and certainly Plato described it as love. And I'm not qualified to explain that anymore. But yeah, it's interesting.
You refer to the AI and how there's obviously lots of conversation around AI and how it's benefiting. But I listened to a podcaster, I can't remember the name, and I apologize if you ever get to hear this, but I just want to, I can't quote your thesis in what you were describing, but basically saying, let's use AI to do all the things that are inhuman so that the teacher can be more human. That was the essence of it. And I think that's what you're saying in terms of what's going on in the Chinese conversation, is, that there is a human connection. And I draw back, and I keep doing this, but Matt Pittman and his work in Australia on the connection curriculum, it's that human connection that is so important, and we are losing if we see children simply as knowledge repositories, stuff them full of knowledge, see that they can recover it. I've said this many times, but there are ways of dealing with that where and it's so heartening to hear this, Daniel. As it's not just what's going on in the UK, but across the world, we're beginning to appreciate this a little bit more. Can I just, we're at 8:30, so I've missed saying all the things that I normally say because we got involved in the conversation. But thank you for those that are commenting. We appreciate you being here and watching. If you like what you're hearing, just press the like and share button. If you're on YouTube, please press subscribe. My team will thank me for saying that, but just it's important. And obviously, those of you that are here listening, this is an important conversation and will shape the future of what we talk of education. Daniel, if in the ideal world, what things do you think leaders in schools should be concentrating on? I mean, I guess actually, if you've heard what we've just talked about, it is about the way you're thinking around the whole world of inclusion. It's not just focusing on, as you said, the Romas or the disadvantaged or whatever. It is about strategies for all of those, I guess. But what in terms of what you've seen in some of the great practice around the world, what's making a difference and what's capturing, the people's attention?
I think that there are. Let me try and answer that question from a slightly different angle, if I may, and hopefully it makes sense why.
Mm.
I think there are three big mountains in the way of inclusion, and they are time, stress, and money.
Right.
And if we ask teachers or even school leaders to be, let's say, more inclusive, whatever you define that as, but what that results in is it's taking up more time of teachers, it's causing more stress, and it even costs more money, then it isn't it's unsustainable and it's unfair. And I think that inclusion is not an add-on or a bolt-on or an additional to. If anything, I hope that it will make life easier. It's easier to be an inclusive teacher than not. It's cheaper to do inclusion well than not, and it takes less time and stress when you have, the top 10 most challenging students in the school, and your relationship with those parents has broken down, and all of those sorts of things. They take a huge amount of time. So if good inclusive practice means we save time and we save money and we save stress from everybody, then I think we're onto a winner. And I think therein lies the gateway to all good practices. So if we combine that with furthering the human connection, then there is a school which was one of the most inclusive schools I've ever seen. And by the way, I don't think of sort of like hierarchy of this is more inclusive than this. I don't have these sort of hierarchies in my head. I mean, maybe one would if one was sort of like Ofsted or something, but I think that's all rather ridiculous. For another time.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that the thing that was really good about this school as a mixed ability school, a state school, was that for the last 15 years or 20 years, the senior leadership team had discussed every week two key questions. One is, how can we further remove the stress burden from teachers? And also, how are our teachers? So at the heart of the inclusion in the school, the very excellent results, which they got higher results than anyone else. I mean, looking at the progress, the value added, they had, it was being led by the teachers, but what the role of the system was to give them as much of that as possible. So if that means taking away homework or taking away marking or taking away lots and lots of things that would facilitate that, then that was a huge boon. They also thought about inclusion, and I've seen this in the school in the Philippines, for example, where there is much less of a divide between the parent and the school. Here we have gates which shut, and then we have procedures as we bring people in. And there are very wise reasons for safeguarding and so on and so forth. But what we're doing also is we create huge walls between the community and the school, whereas this particular school in the Philippines decided to do almost like the opposite. And however they manage their safeguarding, I don't know. But there is something, a lot of the inclusion barriers are rooted in the difficult relationships with parents that they have around certain children. And I remember there was a sort of a report that came out in the early 2000s that I think probably cost millions to produce, and that concluded in something fairly obvious, which was that where there is a good positive relationship between school and parents, there's usually a positive outcome with the children. That's peculiarly to do with SEN more than anything else. And so and so therefore I would suggest that we relocate the question around inclusion from it being all about what's happening with this particular child to what's happening with the adults around that child. And that has to do with their teachers and how they're being supported and what their stress levels are, and how, you know, and the parents and the specialists and one thing and another. That's where the real conversation needs to shift. And just doing this extra piece here, or having that extra piece of equipment, or this extra intervention or whatever, those things don't usually change the dial, and they cost money and time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've set up an SEN system here in England, which is just like awful. And I mean, I wouldn't say criminal. I might get in trouble, but I mean, it feels very, very wrong.
But the one thing, I'm certainly, that's the thing that we do a lot of work on. It's not inclusive; it's exclusive, because it's additionality, and it has all of the things that you've talked about. I'm going to ask you a kind of summation question in a second, but I'm just interested. Could you just go back to that great school? Because I think what you said, the two things that they were asking, you know, so how are our teachers? The first question, could you just go through that? Just say it again.
How can we further remove the burden of stress from our teachers?
Because those, you know, if there was something to do, those are two massive questions that a leadership team, because it changed your mindset. It's an opportunity mindset, not a deficit mindset. We haven't. So what can we do? That's you know, if anything, Daniel, I think that's really powerful to leave, you know, leave people with. So yeah, I just you know, wonderful. Thank you. That's really important. This isn't a twee question. You know, I ask most of our guests this at the end of the cycle of talking, and it's been a great conversation, Daniel. I really appreciate it, and thank you. And because, you know, certainly I think it's something that we in England particularly, but I think across the UK, need to be talking about. You know, we've got so much into performance that we're not really thinking about children as human beings. But if you know, if you were in such a position to make some significant change, and our series in Friday Focus is called Positive Change, because I believe that there are things that we can do, and we can do for positive. What one thing would you leave people to say, go and, you know, be doing this? And I don't mean action; it could be thinking as well. You know, what change your thought on. But what one thing do you think would be most powerful in this agenda and where we are at the moment?
So that's interesting to go and have an experience which will change your mind. And there are two which I'll give you an example of. Teach in a secondary school. Go and spend a couple of days in an early years setting where you will see young humans being engaged with through the fusion of, you know, pastoral issues and curriculum issues, how they really come together, social, emotional, cognitive, physical, they're all one. And that will change your mind. Maybe you have that experience and you work in the early years. You can, another sort of type of experience would be to go, if you're teaching, let's say you've grown up in quite a middle class environment, to go to the home of one of the children who you're teaching, you know, from a very poor background. Open your mind, something that will stain your soul or your being, and that will stick with you and change you. And that is a really beautiful thing. And that it's not something which you can really get through CPD. But it is a sort of you-led form of development, and really what that is sort of, it's sort of fueling and feeding your emotional intelligence and your experience of education and your, you know, your Weltanschauung, your worldview, and so on. So yeah, do a bit of that, and it can be quite enjoyable and fun.
Dan, look, this is not intended to be a sort of deep, you know, so here's an action, go and do, but that's really, really important, you know, actually, you know, do something that's going to change your mind, change your heart, change your, as you say, touch your soul. That if every teacher in the country did that, and I know, obviously within our initial teacher training programs, there is this thing they call contrasting placement, where you go to a different place to see how things are significantly different, and it's with that intention of, okay, you can see it in this context, but you need to see it in a completely different context. And I know the richness of working across the system, around the world, and different schools and different values. It's really great as leaders to ask those questions. So I think that's a really practical thing to leave people with. Daniel, I'm so grateful that we were able to have the conversation, and it is just fortuitous if now is the time that the Inclusion Awards are up again. That wasn't intended in the timescale, but I'd point you, and I'm going to put it on the screen again, if I may. So if you're not aware of, ifip.group will take you to the international forums of inclusion practitioners, and the awards. I'm sure the applications, when it's live, will be there, and you can. It's a fairly simple process and minimal cost to be included. And the awards, as Daniel has said, is don't expect to get the top prize. It's just that you're included, and it's great and a privilege to be part of that whole process. So I commend it to you. It's certainly impacted us as an organisation, and certainly it's part of the values that we as Smart Curriculum work through. So please, if you're able to do so, and Daniel, thank you for being here. I've just got a few things to say at the end, but just I really appreciate your input this morning, and thank you so much. And we'll be in touch in the next couple of weeks. So thank you. Thank you. So just as I conclude, just thank you for being here. I just want to bring in one comment from Donna Wright, who said, "I'm so much richer to have joined IFIP with the other 134 countries. Thanks for the connections across the world, Daniel." So again, that's just a shout out to Daniel and his work within the organisation, and it's great to champion that. And we're running short of time, and I'm sorry I can't flag everybody's comments that are commenting now. But please, if you're on LinkedIn, go and have a look at the comment stream. So please just see and obviously engage in the conversation. It's really appreciate you being here, and thanks for engaging in our conversation. That's a really powerful conversation that we've just had. Just the sort of news from Smart Curriculum, I will just say, I've been talking about capturing what we've been doing over the last few years. Not counterintuitively to what we've just been talking about. Actually, it's part of the conversation. Our first ebook has just been published. It's available on Amazon. You can buy it as a download. It's not a hard copy. It's an ebook. I'm just going to add it to the stage. It's called The Efficient School, and it is about this question of how do we release funds to make some of these things available. Daniel, you talked about that, it's time and it's money that matters, and some of these things do cost. The Efficient School is about this whole subject of how do we release the funds to be most effective. It's not about creating just the top classes and the high performing. It's about how do we provide an equitable service for every child in the building, if it's in a building in a school, and how do we make that inclusive so that every child gets a slice of the pie, if you wish. So please, I know we talk about books, and we'll come to the big read in a couple of weeks' time, but just a shout out for I try to capture what we've been talking about for some time. So thank you everyone for being involved this morning. Appreciate your input. Some great comments that I've not been able to include. We're back next Friday with Felicia Gibson, looking at a platform delivery on SEN provision and that whole, to how do we respond. But so looking forward to that conversation. Really appreciate being here. Thanks very much. We'll end there. See you next week.